Well, welcome to eighth grade math. My name is Mr. King, Ron King. This is going to be my 20th year at Chinook. And if I could just tell a little bit about myself, I grew up a military brat. My dad was in the Army. My mom is German. So about every 2 to 3 years, we moved from the US to Germany repeatedly until I was 18 and graduated high school. But I really grew to love this area. We were stationed out here when Mount St. Helens erupted. So back in the early 80s. Um, Outside of teaching, you can usually find me doing one of these things. I walk a lot with my dog. You could probably find me from time to time down at Long Lake. I like to get out with my kayak, go fishing. I love to coach. It's one of the things I've done in my entire teaching career. I've taught football, or coached football, basketball, soccer, baseball, t-ball, you name it. A little bit of everything. So hopefully, when we come back into school face to face, we'll have a basketball season because that's what I currently coach at Chinook is boys girls basketball, perhaps track depending on how things go. But I'm just really excited to get this year going. I'm really excited for the eventuality of us returning face to face. But let's talk a little bit about eighth grade math. Because we're starting remote, we have looked at prioritizing our standards, so shrinking them down from what we typically do in 180 days, given that our schedule is going to be a little bit different at the beginning. And so here are all the topics. And what I would tell you is the focus this year is really twofold. When it comes to eighth grade math, I don't believe eighth grade math is hard, provided you could do two things. One, notice patterns. Two, can we start to connect some of those patterns to algebra? Okay, because if we can connect those patterns to algebra, that makes next year that much easier. If we can start speaking the language of algebra, start writing it, start using the vocabulary, the notation, all those things, that all goes into being a strong math student in eighth grade. And one of the ways that I like to deliver that is through the use of some technology. Obviously, we're going to be remote learning, but these apps here are all the same things I would use face to face. So obviously, the bulk of what we deliver is going to come through Canvas. And this year, we're adopting a brand new math curriculum called Envision Math. So there will be a digital textbook for you to use, as well as a consumable workbook that will be issued during one of our first distribution days. Otherwise, I like to use a site called Mentimeter. It's an app you can download it on any device. It allows me to create a presentation and students to interact with that presentation. So I can poll kids, I can ask them questions, they can ask me questions, they can give me ratings, they can all number of things with this Mentimeter. So again, that's how I'll present a lot of the information. But also Desmos will come in because a fair amount of what we do, I'd say about half of what we do this year requires us to use a graphing tool. So graph paper would be awesome, but given that I can't hand that out, the Desmos allows us to do that via technology. And Desmos, if you go to look at it for an app, you'll notice that there is a scientific calculator, but there's also a graphing calculator. For what we plan to use it for, the most part this year requires this to be used off of a Chromebook. So using it live over the internet as opposed to on an app. And then because I like to mix things up, make things a little bit more fun, a little more engaging, a little more competitive, I like to use the app called GimKit. If for those of you that are familiar with Kahoot, this is a more a bigger version, more robust version of Kahoot with many more bells and whistles. And so I've really grown to like that app. For the most part, the way we're going to deliver this year is going to be by using what's called a flip model, where we'll focus our in-class time by actually doing the work. So the homework will consist of you looking at notes, looking at maybe watching a video or two, maybe listening to a podcast or something along those lines, and then bringing your questions to class, and that will represent your homework. Because without doing that part, it makes the in part class a little bit harder. And so I'm really excited about kind of flipping this things around a little bit to increase the engagement, and again put those two things into action. Can you notice patterns, and can you apply things algebraically? And so that's what we're looking at. Supply wise, ideally, I would love for you to have a whiteboard at home, because so much of what I'm going to ask you to do, it's so much easier to write it on a whiteboard and then flash it on screen or take a picture of it with your Chromebook. And so if you're able to get those, a whiteboard and a marker, awesome. If not, I will at some point ask and have some available through our distribution days. Same thing with grid paper. Our workbook, what we plan to do is when we have those available for distribution, I plan to stuff some of those with some graph paper so that you have that going into it. And then some form of a notebook, something just to be able to write things down, because clearly it's for some of us, it's so much easier to write things, erase, and be able to take the time instead of doing everything digitally. So in a perfect world, like I said, those three things will go a long ways. Even when we're in the classroom, these are pretty much the three supplies that I require year to year. So let's just talk about patterns real quick. So here's a really a simple pattern. Sure, can you see patterns, but can you describe it? Can you explain how it's growing? Can you make predictions about it? Can you think about what this would look like if we went out another 5 more pictures in this pattern? Could you think about this as writing it as a rule? Like, could I tell you, okay, if you have an idea of how this pattern works, can you project this to say the 100th picture in this? How many of those little circles would be in there? And so that's the kind of work that we're going to do this year. So hopefully, this gets you excited about this year, because I'm really looking forward to when we get ourselves back in the classroom, because for me, that's when the fun really begins. But what I would like you to do, if you don't mind, is within the title or the comments, the description of this video, there is a link for a survey, to provide me a little bit of feedback, but also for you to ask any and all questions that you may have of me. And when we do our live open house, I plan to answer each and every one of those questions. So look for that link in the description, and I look forward to seeing you at open house. Thank you.